Hello and welcome to the today's discussion. It's Women and Animation Film. This is part of the course of Women's Studies, and the paper or the course is Women, Media and Film. Now, animation is all around us. Nowadays, you have smartphone, you see animation there. You watch television, you have animation. You open computer, and you have animation. So we are enveloped, we are surrounded with animation, and it has an influence on kids, small children, as well as elderly people. So animation influences all of us. Now, in this talk or discussion today, we are going to discuss about the beginning of animation, rather history as to how it has developed over a period of time, and how women have been portrayed in animation film, as well as in the industry, what role the women had in making animation films. So they had a dual role, participating, or they are being portrayed, and also they themselves were in the participating in the process of creation. Then we will talk about the Disney, Walter Disney, how in the early days of the last centuries, that is the 20th century, how he took the whole country by storm and started making animation films, and also how others took it up. And there were also alternative movement, how they were countering the kind of culture that Disney was creating. Like we have Czech Republic, the artists from there, artists from Poland, and artists from Japan. They had a kind of counter narrative of making this animation film. And towards the end, we will also see how influential Disney films were on the American public and the rich people around the world, because they were borrowing heavily from fairy tales, the characters of the fairy tales, and rather this influenced the upbringing, particularly the physical upbringing of the women, girl child, in the upper class of the society. So, lot to discuss. Come and we will start right away. The word animation is derived from anima, the Latin word for soul or spirit. There is something called persistence of vision. Now, what is the persistence of vision? Is that when we look at something and we understand what it is, before we look to the other, our brain continues to have that image in our mind. And so, before we go to the next, there is no gap between the first vision, first image that we had, and the second one. This persistence of the first image continues in our brain, and this is called persistence of vision. Now, animators create illusion of motion by photographing drawings, puppets, inanimate objects with slight changes in position and shape in subsequent frames. Like those who have seen animated films, you will know that you need to draw several posters and take photographs of those and put them in a certain order and run them in a certain speed, and you will get an animated film. Now, animation didn't come after film. It in fact predated the invention of cinematograph. Now, in the early 19th century, the devices like Thomas Strobe, like phenakisty scope, like stroboscope, they were invented, and they were the precursor of animation. So, if you see animation film, if we look into the history, it has the history of about 200 years. In 1892, 28th of October, which you can see in your screen, Charles Emile Renaud from Paris, he projected his first film called Pauvre Pierrot. This was the first animated film that was shown in Paris. Then, if you see the history of animation, in many cases we did not have the full-length animation film, but there were parts of it which were animated. Like, say, for instance, George Miller's 1902, A Trip to the Moon. It had a part of animation or animated section of it. Then in the 1920s in America, there were many studios, particularly in New York City, which were constructed, which were started to make animation film. And then Walter Disney, Walt and Roy together, they founded the Disney company for cartoon. And these two brothers, they took by storm the whole country, and they started making animated films. In 1932, they brought color and sound to animation film. Then we know that Fletcher brothers brought in rotoscope processing of animated film. And then Disney evolved a distinct realistic look by incorporating modified version of different innovative process. And around the towards the end of 20th century, you have Disney evolving the computer 3D animation film. In 1995, those who are young and those who are watching this program, you can remember that Toy Story was the first full-length animation or animated film ever produced. After that, now we see all these films around, in television screen. You will see animated full-length film. Some are not full-length in the sense that 2 hours film, but some are 6 minutes film, short films like 9 minutes, and they tell various stories to the children and to the adult also. Now let us discuss how the women were attached, or women had a role to play in animation film. There are two sides of it, as I have said. The women could have been taken at that time as someone who would not do any creative work. Like we know that sometimes when the children are at home and we are teaching them how to paint, how to draw, we bring tracing paper and we draw the outline of a flower or outline of an animal, say like cat or dog, and we give them color pencil and we say, now you paint on the outline that has been given to you. So women were given that kind of work, like it is said, inking and painting. So they were considered at that time not to be very creative, and so they were in the periphery. Also, if you see the film of that time, the women character that were portrayed in animation films, they were portrayed as not so elevating characters. They were in the periphery. So from both the sides, as in the portrayal, as a participant in the animation film, as a character, the women were in the periphery, and also as technician or as someone who was taking part in creative activity, they were really not given creative role to play. They were asked to ink and paint, as it was said at that time. Now, we have some alternative trends in animation. As I was saying, that in the United States itself, United Productions of America, they were doing something that were not of Disney style. And then you have Hermina Trilova, Karel Zeman and Jiri Trnka. These artists were from Czech Republic, and they started a school called Czech School of Animation, and they were an alternative of Disney tradition. So they were not following what Disney was doing. they had their own way of projecting the animation film, and they were rooted in their own culture, own folk culture, and that's how they were able to do something different other than what Disney was doing. Then in Poland, we have, as I was telling you, Jiri Trnka, his famous film that came in 1965. It is called The Hand, and another film was made called Genesis in 1966 by Jana Margrovla. So these were the alternative move other than the Disney. Okay, then things carried on. Say, for instance, in Poland, you have artists, you have directors of animation film who were not following Disney. They were doing something like etching on glass and painting those things. So that was something very different than what Disney was doing. Then you have in Japan another school called Gaken. This was a company that was established by Matsuo Zimbo, and she was doing a lot of animation film in a Japanese way. And the characters of this film, particularly in Japan, they were not over sexualized and they were not over domesticated. Why we say this? Because in most of the animation film, if the female characters are portrayed at all, then they would be shown as a commodity, a sexual commodity. They were over sexualized, and the other would be that they were very domesticated, so they would live within the four walls of the house and they would do all kinds of domestic work. But this Japanese company that started making animation film, they were taking the women out. They were giving them different roles, not very high level role, not very low level, and they were definitely not following the Disney way of portraying women. Uh, then we move on to the Russian film, and they also worked in the line, but they are not so famous. But Eisenstein, the great filmmaker from Russia, he said that, Sergei Eisenstein said that there is a lot of connectivity with human psyche, connectivity of animation film with the human psyche. Then there was another German philosopher called Walter Benjamin, and he also pointed out that animation films had the subversive potential in its content, because it can lead people to subversive activities. Now, animated characters that we see, particularly of female characters, they were mostly in those days stereotyped. Like, they will be covered, well clothed, they will do, mundane kind of jobs at home, and they would be shown as, a symbol of sex. That was the traditional role that the women characters were given in various animation film, and also they were portrayed as stereotype. What are those stereotypes? Like, they are weak, they are fair skinned, they do not have much intelligence, they are not made for great jobs, like that. So in literature, you have human characters, including animals, objects, and even phenomena like storm are often attributed to human characteristics. It is called anthropomorphized. So this is what is done. That means all the inanimate objects, something that is of nature, would also be given human characteristics and human gender. They would be treated like humans. On the basis of gender, animated characters are also classified as males, as female, and androgynous. Androgynous means the characters that would have both the characteristics of male and female. Sometimes we can say also herbophoриtes. Now, if we see that what animated films were doing, we can summarize them as central women characters in most of the animated films since the origin of the medium have been portrayed in ways to reinforce the gender stereotype. So, gender stereotype was one thing that was reinforced. So, people believed in more that women are made for this and they should continue in that. Women are also underrepresented both in animation industry, we have found out that, and as professional. And then they were over sexualized, then the males, and they were taken to a level, something called absurdity, very unrealistic. Now, all these things that we have seen in our animated films doesn't speak well for the women character, because women were not shown in a very empowered manner. In every aspect, we have found that so far in the history that they were incapable of creative work. They are to be domesticated. They were shown as sex symbol, and they were not given much a role to play. Also, if we now move on to the Disney making of film or portrayal of women, they were heavily borrowing from the fairy tales of 17th and 18th century. Now, why they were doing this? Because they were giving certain kind of values that the rich people could afford and would follow. Like you have fairies are portrayed as very fair skinned, having good height, would have slim and trim figure, would have silky hair, would have sharp nose, would have very beautiful eyes. So all these things were portrayed in Disney films, which they heavily borrowed from fairy tales, and these were being served to the families, to the members of the rich and upper class in America. So you promote certain kind of values through that, and this continued around the world because these characters, they never change, they never get old, they are always the same. Even if they are taken from one story to another story, they remain the same. Like the fairies never get old, they are as young as ever. They have they never gray, their hair remain black or golden. So all these things would be shown. So the last part that we would like to discuss and talk to you is we need to be very careful when we are making animation film, because we are promoting certain kind of values that would not go well for the people in for the general people. So and since many children they watch these films, so at a very young age they are going to have these values and they will never be able to get rid of this. Particularly Disney was borrowing heavily from Jack Jives in his classical book called Fairy Tales and the Art of Subversion, and these fairy tales were written to provide models of behavior for rearing and schooling of upper class children. Mainstream animated films, movies help encourage the association of physical unattractiveness with being evil. So if you are physically not attractive, not good looking, then you would be considered as evil. Uh, Female Disney characters are very similar in appearance and other traits of the character despite featuring in separate films, and even lead characters who are supposed to be strong and possible role models for girl audiences continue to bear exaggerated stereotypical gender marks. So we have covered a lot, many points. So we have seen how animation film has come about. It is painstakingly, you need to produce poster after poster, put them one after the other, take photograph of each, put them in a certain way, and then run them at a certain speed so that they make move. They make movement from one place to the other. So from there we have seen that there were many devices that were discovered, and the person or the company that came forward and really gave a push to animation film is the Walter Disney, and they continue even today, and they spread animation filmmaking around the world. But there were many instances where people were not following, the artists and the directors were not following them. We talked about Czech Republic, where artists who were rooted in their own culture approach animation filmmaking in a different way. We have seen that in Poland also, people tried to make films in a way that Disney would not do, and they cut a new ground to making making animation film. And also we have seen that there were efforts in Japan where animation films were made differently. So I'm sure now if you see animation film, try to look beyond whatever you see in front of you, analyze them and gain knowledge. Have an analytical mind that goes around, because nowadays we are surrounded with animation films. If you have a smartphone, you open it, you see animation there. You go to a cinema hall, you see animation. You open television channel, you see animation. You open your computer, you see animation. So we are enveloped with animation, and we need to be very alert to read those and make meaning of those. So thank you for participating in this discussion, watching that one, read the modules, and I am sure you will be very alert next time. Thank you.